What is up, YouTube? I hope you're doing well. Today, we're going to be talking about how to build in Deadlock. I keep getting asked on my stream about this all the time. How do I build in Deadlock, especially for newer players coming from other MOBAs? So I wanted to make a video that I think by the end of it will help you fully understand what goes into a build in Deadlock, or at least leave you on the right path to getting better on your own and implementing your own builds in your own games. Now, there are already a lot of good build guides out there, especially Poshy Pop's video. I recommend watching that. But it's a little bit more advanced and there's a lot of information in it. So I kind of want to consolidate everything into just a general guide that will help you a lot. So enough yapping, let's get right into it. Okay, the first thing I want to talk about really quickly, guys, is the overall stats in this game. So there's a lot of stats in Deadlock, just like any other MOBA. You know, we have our power, we have our resistances, we have our health, we have our attack speed, we have movement speed, all that stuff that's going to exist in other MOBAs. But the thing that we're going to talk about mostly today are the three main categories in Deadlock. They're going to be your weapon damage, your vitality, which is just your health, and your spirit power. It's pretty simple. Your weapon damage is going to scale your gun's damage. Your vitality is going to increase your overall health. And your spirit power is going to increase your spirit power, and most of the abilities in the game are going to scale with your spirit power. Now, not all of them, and that's what makes Deadlock cool, but as a general rule of thumb, spirit power is going to increase a lot of your abilities, damage, or usefulness. So why are these the three main categories that we're going to talk about? Well, for one, they're the three categories in the shop that we can actually purchase from, and they're kind of like the foundational stats in this game. But also in Deadlock, which is unique from other MOBAs, whenever you buy an item from one of these categories, the game is actually going to give you an extra stat alongside the item that you're purchasing. Think of it as a little bonus gift for investing into that category. It's different from other MOBAs because when you buy an item in like League or Smite, you're getting what's ever on the label of the item. So you're getting like the stats that it shows and maybe the active or the passive, and that's it. However, in Deadlock, when we buy from the weapon category, we're going to get weapon damage alongside the item that we get. When we buy from the vitality category, we're going to get a percent health increase alongside the item that we're buying. And then we buy from the spirit category, we're going to get spirit power in addition to, you know, the item that we're buying. All of this is going to be reflected down here in the bottom left. If you just hover over your orange, your green, your purple, you can actually see the amount that you'll get for each item. So if I buy an 800 weapon item, I'll get 9% extra weapon damage. Then it'll go to 12% when I get to 1600 spent in that category. Same thing applies to green, our purple, everything. You can see it all down here. Very straightforward. If you're ever really interested in the exact numbers, you can look there. But at the end of the day, this isn't something you need to worry about too much. You don't want to overload your brain. Just recognize that this is what's happening when you're buying items. So what does this mean off the bat? It already means that in Deadlock, there's a lot more variation in the build, and you can get away with a lot more just because, you know, your damage is going to fall off tremendously if you get like a utility item that's like a tier 3 spirit item, for example, because we're still going to get some of that flat spirit power by just investing into that category. Before we get into the more specific stuff, I want to talk about the logic of each character's style of play. So what does this mean? If you're trying to play a new character, you could go to a streamer's chat and just ask them, you know, what type of character is this? Do I build them gun? Do I build them spirit? You could look it up. You could try and find like popular builds and see what they're building. But like I could tell you that Hayes is a gun character, but that doesn't mean you understand why she's a gun character. So that's why I want to give you guys some ways to think about characters or some logic that you can use on your own to understand what a character does. Especially if like a new character comes out, you can use this, you know, on your own. You won't have to rely on anybody else, and you can kind of figure out what they specialize in. So let's take Mina as an example real quick. Mina has 4 abilities that scale with spirit. Her 1's damage scales with spirit, and the heal on the 1 will scale with spirit as well. Her 2's actual range of the dash scales with spirit. Her 3 love bites, the burst damage when you hit them enough with it will scale with spirit. And of course, her ultimate scales with spirit. So we now have 4 abilities that scale with spirit. So you might be thinking, okay, well, that means she's probably a spirit character, and you're kind of on the right track. But it's not just that will justify it. It's also the fact that we have an on-hit effect. Every single time we hit a bullet, it's going to do spirit damage. So you combine both of those things and the fact that Mina's base gun damage isn't the greatest if you just compare it across the game, that is going to lean her more towards a spirit character. Now on the flip side, let's take a character like Venator. He has a good fire rate, a high base mag size. His 1 scales with weapon damage, so it's not scaling with spirit, it's actually scaling with weapon damage. The same thing with his 2. His 3 will actually scale off spirit, but not too big of a deal. And then his ult scales with weapon damage. Now he does have a thing in his kit where his resist will actually scale with a bit of spirit, but it's kind of irrelevant because the point is all of his abilities incentivize it. His gun is really good as well, and it's going to scale really well with weapon damage. Therefore, this character's identity or specialization is going to be into the gun category. Some other things you can think about when it comes to this are like your cast times or your actual positioning in fight. So for example, let's take Apollo. Why don't you build gun Apollo? I mean, it may seem obvious because we have 4 damaging abilities that scale with spirit, so that's part of it. But there's another thing you can think about why you don't build gun Apollo. Let's just cycle through our abilities real quick. I'm going to use my 1. I'm going to use my 2. I'm going to use all of my 3. What'd you notice about that? I just sat in cast time for probably about 10 seconds. During all of that cast time, I cannot use my left click. So because my cast times are so long, it'll be very hard to get value out of being able to hold left click nonstop. Therefore, Apollo's kit just kind of doesn't incentivize a gun build. Another example is Mo and Krill. You know, this is a beefy character that needs to be up close and personal to get use out of his abilities. All of his stuff is pretty much up close. Not only that, but he has long channels. If I go into Burrow, I cannot shoot my gun at all during any of this. I literally cannot left click. It's also a long channel. When I come out of it, it takes a sec for me to be able to even shoot my gun again. And not only that, but our ultimate, when we combo somebody, is a long duration where we cannot left click. Therefore, I know we want to be in the thick of the fight, and I also know we're not going to be shooting our gun that much. That probably incentivizes Mo to be more of a tank / spirit character. Now, the true beauty of Deadlock is that you can build a lot of different stuff on a lot of different characters, but if we're talking what's optimal, this is a line of thinking that you can go down to kind of figure out what works on each character. Now, there are also a decent amount of characters where it's not so obvious, and they can actually get a lot of value out of every category, and that just kind of makes them hybrid characters. You know, you can kind of build a lot of different stuff on them, kind of build towards your style of play and that kind of thing. So remember those bonus stats that I was talking about from before? In Deadlock, when you invest 4,800 into any category, those bonuses are going to multiply and get way more efficient. You know, as you can see, when we go from 800 to 1.6, we're getting 3% extra weapon damage, then 2.4, it's 3% extra, then 3.2, another 3%. But when we go from 3.2 to 4.8K, it goes up to 28% increase. That is a huge jump, and this applies to every single category. You know, in Vitality, it goes up to 18% when it was just increasing by 3 and 5%. And in the Spirit category, we go up by 19 when it was just going up by 4 previously. Now, one thing you'll notice is that for Weapon in Vitality, it's actually percentage-based, which means the longer the game goes on, the more efficient these will get, whereas Spirit is a flat stat. So this is actually going to be the most efficient early on, but isn't going to scale as well as these percentages over here. So what does this all mean? What it means is that in general right now, and this is what I recommend, is that you should actually play for all 3 of these investment spikes and then specialize into the style of play that your character actually wants. That means spend 4,800 in the weapon category, spend 4,800 in the vitality category, and spend 4,800 in the spirit category. Now, not necessarily in that order, but at least getting all 3 of these before, you know, specialize into the weapon category. You know, if you're like a Hay, or investing in the spirit category if you're like a Mina. Now, there are some exceptions to this rule, but as just a general rule of thumb, as you get better at building and better understand it, this really can't ever steer you wrong. But if you are ever confused or it feels bad, you can just look up some of the meta builds and try and understand why they are the way they are. So speaking of which, let's go ahead and look at some of the top builds from pro players and stuff and see if they go for these 4.8 spikes on each category and kind of see where they do it. So let's use Mina as an example again. Let's go ahead and go to the build browser. We'll go to the public. I'm going to use OC's build. He's considered one of the top EU pros. He's a good Mina player, so we'll go ahead and select his build. Let's just look at it and analyze it real quick. So as you can see here, we get 4 spirit items, and that's going to be 4,800 spent in spirit. So that's going to be our spirit investment. We're going to extra health, so a little bit of green, then mystic shot, so a little bit of weapon. And then we go into Dispel Magic, extra stamina, weapon shielding. This will also be our green invest. So now we have our spirit and our green investment, and then combine Mystic Shot with Spirit Rend, and that will be our gun investment. So we now gotten our 3 investment bonuses and 4,800 in each category, basically. And then we're specializing into spirit because Mina's a spirit character. So the logic follows. We get our investment bonuses, and then we specialize. Let's go even a step further, because you might find yourself in a spot not knowing which items to buy on a character that wants to specialize into spirit, for example. Well, Mystic Shot gives us spirit power and also scales with spirit damage, the actual burst. The proc will scale with spirit. And then the other item that he's getting is Spirit Rend, which is actually going to shred their spirit resist. And since we're a spirit build, that's going to synergize perfectly. So we've now gotten 2 items that scale perfect with our spirit build. One is just like good spirit damage, and the other is good utility because it's shredding their resist, which has just made our build super efficient because it gave us our weapon investment while also not really, not really sacrificing our build in, our specialization, which is spirit. Let's look at another example. We'll take Lash now. We'll also use another OC's build. He's just a really good player. So let's look at the logic of his builds. We've done the same thing. We've got our spirit investment early, which again, I talked about before. It's actually the best investment bonus to get because it's flat, so it's more efficient early as opposed to at a percentage. And then over here, it says pick one, whichever you feel, Majestic or Warpstone. In a lot of Deadlock builds, it'd actually be like based on what you enjoy in your play style. So that's something you'll definitely notice. You choose one of these and then you choose one of these, and he's saying just pick one because as you'll notice, that's 3,200 spent over here, and then it's 1,600 over here, which will be at your 4,800 bonus. Perfect. There's our green investment. And then immediately he has Mystic Shot and Alchemical Fire. Again, Mystic Shot scales with Spirit, which is with the specialization that we're going for. And then Alchemical Fire will also give us 10 spirit power, and the damage per second plus the bullet resist shred on Alchemical Fire scales with spirit. So again, it just synergizes perfectly while also giving us all our investment bonuses before our specialization. Let's look at one more example. We'll look at a Haze build. Haze is a gun character, highly incentivized by her abilities. Her ult scales off of weapon damage. Her 3 fixation stacks are going to scale with weapon, so kind of just a weapon-based character. We'll look at Parzellion's Haze build. He's considered the best Haze player in the world, and I like him a lot, so we'll use his build. So let's just look at it real quick. We get extra health, a little bit of green, and then we go into Swift Striker, opening rounds, active reload. That's 4,800 spent right there, so that's our weapon invest. Boom, off the bat. We go into Bullet Lifesteal, Slowing Hex, so a little bit of green, a little bit of purple, not quite at our investment bonus. We go Slowing Bullets. Then we get a Fury Trance, which is not at our investment bonus yet, but Surge of Power combined with Slowing Hex, that's going to be our investment bonuses. It's very easy to tell if it's a tier 3 item and a tier 2 item, that's your investment bonus. So purple is done there. Then we get Burst Fire, Fortitude, and Fortitude with our Fury Trance will be our green investment. So it's a little bit delayed, but for the most part, we're still getting all 3 of our investment bonuses. And then we're going to specialize into our gun character, which is Capacitor, Ricochet, Silencer, you know, all those greedy tier 4 items that will scale really well into the late game. So as you notice through a lot of these builds, guys, we're just getting all of our investment bonuses and then specializing into the category. Now, there are going to be exceptions to this, like for example, Venator, you're probably not going to get your Spirit Invest because he doesn't really have much that scales with it. Or a character like I talked about before, Apollo or Mo, you're probably not going to get your Gun Invest because their kits just don't really incentivize it much at all. But I promise if you follow this as just like a general rule of thumb, it'll help you a lot with your own builds. Now, a couple things to add is do not forget to counter build. I think you should have at least a couple counters in your build, or at least always be thinking about them. And if you don't know what items counter what characters, I have an entire video based on that. Literally every single character in the game and how to counter them. You know, if you're playing like a greedier character, such as like a carry, something like a Dispel Magic to be more safe on your own will be useful. Whereas if you're playing a support, again, think about the logic of your character. Are you trying to help out your teammates? If you are, then maybe you can build something like a Knockdown or a Curse to kind of counter the enemy team to help out your own team. Keep using that logic that we talked about before to figure out what counter items will work best in any given game. Now, it's especially good if you can slot them in to get your investment bonus in a category you aren't actually specializing in. Just for a quick example of that, we're looking at a Wraith build from OCs. As you can see here, he gets his weapon investment, he gets his spirit investment, all good. But for his green investment, he has extra health, healing right, which is 1,600 spent. Now he needs a 3,200 item. He actually goes Dispel Magic because a lot of people will build Slowing Hex and stuff to counter Wraith so that she can't TP out. So if we go Dispel Magic, that'll give us our green investment, and it will also give us a counter item to help deal with the people that are trying to counter us. But of course, Wraith is a hyper carry and more of a gun/spirit character, so we're not really specializing in that. So it gets us our investment bonuses here, and then we can go into our damage. Now, the individual items that we're building in these builds is going to come down a lot to like the meta, what recent changes have happened to those items. So that's going to be a little bit harder to follow. That's where I recommend, you know, following some popular builds and kind of copying from them, seeing what's meta with like the top players, and then you can throw them in your own builds based on the fact that, you know, those items are just strong right now. So that's why I say here you should use the popular builds starting out, especially from higher level players whose builds are usually good. So people like Lightbringer, OCs, ABL, Parzellion, Ido, like just a bunch of good like pro players who generally have pretty good builds. You can follow along with those builds and you should be feeling pretty good. However, the caveat is, and this is very important, is you should be thinking about why those items make sense on the hero you're playing and why they might have chosen those specific items instead of the others. The more you do this, the better you will get at building on your own. So what do I mean by this? I think we talked about it a little bit before with the Mina build, where we got the weapon investment by using items that are going to scale our spirit build. But let's look at the Parzellion build again, for example. Haze's 3 or Fixation applies a stack that increases your weapon damage every time you hit a bullet. So as you'll notice in Parzellion's build, he has a lot of items that give him fire rate, because the higher our fire rate is on Haze, the more fixation stacks we're going to apply to the enemy. So we have an item like Swift Striker, we have an item like Active Reload. Both are going to increase our fire rate quite a bit, and it's going to give us more fixation stacks. So as our tier 2 green item, why are we building Bullet Lifesteal? Well, because we're going into a gun build, and the percentage lifesteal that we get from this is going to scale really well into the late game, because the more damage we do with our gun, the more health we're going to get back. Why is an item like Slowing Bullets good on Haze? Well, let's put an Infernus real quick here. When we ult somebody, they're going to run away. If we slow them and keep them in our ult longer, we're going to be doing more damage. So we're just kind of CCing them to keep them in our ult for a longer amount of time, therefore more DPS. Haze is a gun character, but we're going a tier 3 spirit item to give us our spirit investment. And what does this do? It gives us fire rate. When we use our dagger, we apply it to our dagger, we throw it at the Infernus, and we shoot. Our fire rate is heavily increased. therefore applying more fixation stacks. Let's look at another example. Let's look at Dynamo. We're using Piggy's build, who's an EU support player who's really good. We have an item like Headhunter and Recharging Rush in the build. Why does that make sense on Dynamo? For one, gun items are decent on Dynamo because he only has 2 damaging abilities. So if you want to do damage to people, you're going to have to be able to do damage with your gun. Number 2, your knockup on Dynamo, whenever you hit somebody with it, it sets up your headshot perfectly. And if it hits a little bit harder, we'll get a Recharging Rush from it because Headhunter actually applies to the Recharging Rush passive. So just make sure you're thinking about why those items make sense on each character. Some of it is going to be a bit more obvious than others, and it's okay if you don't fully understand right away. Sometimes you won't understand why it is like that, but then when you use the build, it just feels right. So that's just another way to learn. But yeah, guys, at the end of the day, Deadlock is a complex game. There's a lot of variety and variation in the builds and what you do in any given game or any given meta. So it can get a little overwhelming at first, but I promise if you try and think about the logic of each character, you follow this guideline of getting each spike on most characters in the game and then specializing, and then also make sure you're counter building and make sure you're following along with the popular builds and using the right items in a given meta because, you know, they just so happen to be very good right now because Yoshi decided to change them in the last patch. And then consistently just think, just use your brain a little bit so you can start to improve and think about things on your own independently of whether or not pro players are building them. You will in no time be an independent builder, being able to make all of your own builds that fit your character and your playstyle perfectly. Or at the very least, after watching this video, I think you'll just be a little bit more comfortable building and not feel so overwhelmed. That is it, guys. I hope you guys enjoyed. If you have any questions, feel free to leave them down in the comments below. I'll try and get back to you, try and answer everything. Make sure you're not feeling lost or anything like that. And of course, if you learned anything or enjoyed this video, don't forget to like, comment, subscribe. I'm going to be releasing a lot more Deadlock content. If you have any like specific guide content that you would like to see, then let me know as well. But yeah, I hope you guys enjoyed. Stay safe and healthy as always. I'll see you guys in the next one. Peace out, guys. Bye-bye.